Welcome to the Plant Spirit Podcast on connecting with plant consciousness and the healing wisdom of nature. I'm your host, Sara Artemisia, and I'm excited to introduce our next guests to the show today. Michelle Cassandra Johnson is an author, activist, spiritual teacher, racial equity consultant, beekeeper, and intuitive healer. She teaches transformative experiences, inspiring people to stand in their humanity and wholeness. Michelle is also the co-author of The Wisdom of the Hive, co-written with Amy Burtaine. Amy Burtaine is a leadership coach and racial equity trainer. Her trainings for social change include work with Google, the DNC, and the ACLU. So Michelle and Amy, thank you so much for joining us here today. Such an honor to have you with us.
Thanks for inviting us to be here today. It's great
I'm
to be with you.
so excited for our conversation about the bees. I'm like, this has been many years in the making. And so it's so wonderful to be talking with you today. And I'd love to just dive in here with really a curiosity around what practical and mystical lessons can the honeybees teach us and the more than human world?
Such a big question, Sarah. And we've written 18 chapters about it in The Wisdom of the Hive. And I can share some of the lessons that are very present for me today. Earlier today, I went out to my bee yard and I have 5 honeybee hives. And I was watching them ascend, which, if people have been around a wild hive or an apiary before, they will have witnessed bees leave the hive and launch either out of the hole in a tree or stump of a tree or hive box from the landing board, and the bees ascend. And I always love watching them for as long as I can. And then at some point they like disappear, right? It's like, to me, it feels like they go up to the heavens or the above, and then they come back into view when they get close to the hive, and they make their way into the hive in this, what can look like a serpent, that kind of flow of moving back and forth, or what is often called an orientation flight to their hive. So they weave their way back into the hive. And so I was watching them do this, and hundreds of bees were ascending today. And I was thinking about, and I often think about and this feels mystical and practical to me, the way bees work between realms and the way they ascend. And I assume, they're foraging, they're going to gather resources or information, or to search out where a field of flowers might be, nectar or water, something that's needed in the hive that is physical or metaphysical. And they are bringing that back to the hive when they journey and make their way into the darkness of the hive. And the reason this feels, it sounds mystical, right? To be able to ascend and to travel to the above, and then to be able to return to earth, right? With a duty to take care of the hive, or a duty that is in service of the hive and their superorganism as a hive, which is the way they operate together as in union with one another. So just traveling between realms feels mystical. And then the practical piece of that for me is I am aware that so much chaos is unfolding on our planet right now. I will not suggest that the chaos is new, although the intensity of it feels different to me and heightened for sure. My nervous system feels dysregulated more than it ever has, and most of the people I come into contact with seem to be dysregulated at different points. How could they not be dysregulated given just the unraveling, the unfolding, the things that are nonsensical, the polarization and divisiveness that is playing out, and how fractured we are from each other, human to human, and the more than human world, how we're separated from it. And so the practical piece for me is what information, it's really a question and curiosity, might I gather from other realms to bring back here in service of the collective, human and more than human, just as I witnessed the bees doing that. And, the way we've explored this in the wisdom of the hive is through all of these different themes of working with polarities, the above and below, right? The above in this earthly realm, um, the darkness and light, which is something the bees work with all of the time, being able to work with the void and not fear it, and not fear the darkness, and also experience this time as a portal of experience. Um, Even the term that people use to describe this time as apocalyptic, which is a revelation, right? It's this process of revealing what has been maybe under the surface that needs attention. And these are themes the bees work with. The sting, right, is something we explore. Even the venom, waking up to truths that we may not want to reckon with at this time. And then, of course, this laboratory of the honeybee hive and an explanation in the wisdom of the hive of how bees actually work to support their hive and superorganisms. So this traveling between realms is something I think about a lot and can witness in physical form, witness the bees do this every day, and also then think about how they inspire me to contemplate, what do I need to know right now? It's not that I need to know everything or that I ever assume that. I really don't. What information might I be able to gather if I open myself to the reality that it's likely there are other realms and experiences and lifetimes, incarnations that I can draw from, ancestral wisdom that I can draw from, um, to bring into the now. So that's what they're teaching me right now.
Amazing. So, so powerful, so much in that. And that question really about asking that question of, what information might I be able to gather now? There's such a powerful query.
So I would say there's so much, and it is a big question. And as Michelle said, the whole book are lessons from the hive and practices and practicalities, but also the mysticism. Michelle and I always say we're in the bee mystery school, like we are students of the mystery of the bees, right? And we're in their mysticism school. And I think a lot about what Michelle already mentioned, that the bees are a superorganism, which I think is such a powerful lesson for humanity, right? That the bees don't do anything to harm the collective, right? They don't act for individual gain. They don't act in selfish ways, right? What they are doing is always for the good of the hive. It is almost impossible for them to do anything that would harm the hive or harm the queen, right? They are there to nurture, feed, protect, grow. And Michelle always says that's also for future generations, not just for the now. And so I think, certainly one of the things that Michelle and I wish when we think about the bees and the metaphors they offer to humans is how can we learn from and act more in concert with one another as human beings and the more than human world, to recognize that we are part of nature, like you said, and that we are part of a collective that can only survive if we are, as a collective, um, tending and caretaking one another, right? And so I think for me, it's interesting. Yesterday we were leading our book club around with the book, and the themes we were talking about yesterday was darkness, as Michelle mentioned already, and a teacher of ours, Frances Willard, calls this time the long dark. We are in a period of the long dark, right? Which feels like everything is quote unquote descending into chaos, and things are breaking down, and he sort of flips that on its head, and we do it in the book as well, that for the bees, the darkness is a known and a knowing. And so the bees don't fear the dark. The bees create in the dark and tend in the dark and birth in the dark and transmute in the dark. They literally turn nectar into honey in the dark. And so there's something really powerful to be learned even in times of disruption if we can quiet down and listen. And we talk also in the book about attunement, right? How do we quiet down enough by regulating our own nervous systems, attuning to our own needs and nervous systems, and then attune to one another to be able to be an open and receptive communication? And how do we attune collectively so that we are acting in concert with the good of the whole, right? With what is needed for that which is life-giving. So I'll stop there. I don't know how practical that was, but
To
so
me,
it
it's
came up.
incredibly practical. The fact that bees don't do anything that to harm the collective, I'm like, what?
Yeah,
It's just mind blowing to me that that's even like, why is that even so hard for humans? I'm like, that should just be a given. I feel personally.
totally.
Um, yeah, so powerful. And just that aspect of not fearing the darkness, right? It's like seeds also germinate in the darkness. And so it's a really powerful time that we're in right now for germinating the seeds of what is it that we want to bring forward in the world, both in our own inner life and in our connection with all life as well. And that aspect of the attunement piece, I actually highlighted this in your book. I was curious if you could speak a bit more about this, or really about what the bees can teach us about attunement as a form of deep listening, because that resonated so deeply with me when I read that.
Yeah, I'll start just because it's a chapter that I worked on, but I'd love to then pass it to Michelle because I know we both have deep thoughts about this. And, one of the practices that we offer in the book is humming. So one of the things that any bee tender or person that's around bees is you can tell a lot about the well-being or emotions, one might say, or health of the hive based on the hum. And so the hum is how one of the ways they communicate. They communicate through sound, they communicate through movement, they communicate through pheromones. But they are attuning to one another, checking in with one another, moving together, right? Shifting, adapting, and they communicate about this. And so for me, one of the biggest and beautiful pieces of their attunement is how they hum together. And I know as a bee tender that whenever I'm doing something wrong or I'm, moving too fast or doing something that the bees don't like, their pitch shifts as a collective. Like it goes up, it gets more stressed, it gets more high pitched, and they're clearly saying like, "Hey, back off! This is not working." Right? So they are attuned to one another through sound, movement, and vibration. And one of the things that we offer in the book that we want is for um, a practice is for us as human beings. We can certainly meditate, but we can also, through sound and vibration, work on our own nervous systems through the practice of humming, either individually or collectively. If folks are around bees, hum with the bees. If not, pull up a YouTube video and hum with them. It is an incredibly powerful practice to regulate and down regulate the nervous system. It's also a really powerful practice to do collectively. Michelle and I have been doing it across the country at our book readings, where we'll sit with groups of people and hum, and people are just so touched and amazed, even in a short period of 5 minutes, of how deep they felt connected to one another and how different they feel after that experience. So that's what's initially coming up for me, but I want to pass it to Michelle.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. It's often when I talk about the bees, I talk about my mom. Her name is Clara. And the reason why I bring her in to most spaces, in particular, if I'm talking about bees, is because when the bees came to me, my mother was quite ill. And we thought she was transitioning from the earthly realm. She's still earthside, still quite ill. And I was having, and bees are psychopomps in the way that I described earlier of traveling between realms. And so a friend suggested the bees chose you at this time, perhaps to help your mom transition. So I was talking to my mom, Clara, last night, and I believe that she is experiencing some early signs of dementia. We aren't sure yet. And I was telling her what day it was because she couldn't keep track of that. And I told her yesterday was Wednesday, where I am, and I said, "Today's Wednesday, Mom. Today is Wednesday." She kept confusing the day. And I had this moment of um, wondering, how do I need to communicate this so that she'll understand it? And so your question about deep listening totally brought that to me. Like I was saying the words that I understood in the language that I speak to communicate what day it was, right? And something was happening in her being that compromised her ability to grasp that information. This feels like the microcosm of what's happening in the macro experience. of what are we saying to each other? Are we even listening? And I'm not blaming my mom, of course. There's something going on that's cognitive and affecting her ability to grasp and hold on to information. But the energy of it is what I'm speaking to, of like, we're talking past each other, myself included. We're not listening to each other. We're not listening to ourselves. We're not listening to the more than human world, which is such a teacher and mirror for us. If we get quiet enough through practices of attunement and stillness and rest to listen to what is actually being communicated, sometimes through words and sometimes through energy, and sometimes through a language that we may have to learn how to be more adept at understanding. And so that's what I'm thinking about with this attunement. And it, Amy and I talk about how we're students of the bees. And so when I approach my beehives to sit with them, often I'm going to sit and observe and listen. Not in an extractive way, like, what do you have to show me? But often I am like, well, what's happening today? What might they have to share with me? What do I need to know? Versus the assumption that they need me to go out there to do something for them. Bees have survived for millions of years. They probably don't need me to do anything. And in fact, there are ways it's likely I disrupt their flow, right? And the way they would actually operate aligned with the laws of nature. And so I just think about the hum, the vibration, as Amy mentioned, their movements, all of the different things, ways they communicate with one another, this system that they have of communication. And as a student of them, what I can learn from that to be able to listen more deeply to myself and to listen to others and what wants to be communicated with me. And it feels like this is connected to the beginning of the book of, what if the bees, our friend and teacher, Ariella Daly, shared with us, what if they're here to save us, right? Not to burden them. And there's even this line in the book of, how could we know how to save them? We have this hierarchy of human over earth. How would we ever assume that we knew how to save these creatures and spiritual beings and sentients who've been around for a long time and have adapted to the things that we've done throughout time as humans to disrupt the climate and create chaos? Actually, we need to flip the script on that and become students of the more than human world in all of these ways so that we can remember how to listen. And I say remember because I think at some point I know in our lineages, there was a way that we actually were in alignment with the more than human world. So how do we remember those practices and those ways of being to be able to come into this place of deep listening, which is so desperately needed at this time?
So desperately needed. Thank you for sharing that. I'm so sorry about what you're experiencing with your mom too, and what she's going through. And so yeah, just really honor that in your journey.
Thank you.
And yeah, and also amazing to me that you can, even through the grief and the challenge of that, see the connection with the bigger macrocosm, and just seeing the lessons and the learning that's coming through that as you're going through that. And also that aspect of what you shared about really becoming students of the more than human world, so that we can remember how to listen. This is so key. This is so key. This is so vital. This is literally how we get through this transition. This is it. It's that. It's listening. It's deeply, deeply listening to nature, to the more than human world, and just asking, how is it that you are doing this? Already living in wholeness. We used to remember how to do that. Some people still do around the planet. Amazing. What can we learn from them as well? Indigenous peoples who are living around the planet still in these unbroken lineages of connection. It's incredible. Incredible. So this thing too of what you were talking about, the attunement through sound, movement, and vibration, this feels really, really key to me, because there is a lot being lost in translation right now in the words and how people are communicating via words. Like you spoke to the polarity that's so big right now in the media and in just the human experience of being in relationship. And there's this. So for me personally, nature communicates a lot through light and geometric patterns. And then as a human, I feel like it's my job to translate that into a framework of words that have a much more linear experience to communicate that outwardly. But there's this invitation that I feel in that, so connected with what you were saying about just like really dropping into this core experience of attunement in the sound and vibration and the stillness, that there is a quality of connectivity and wholeness in the stillness that is completely available. It's totally free for all of us to connect with at any moment, if we can possibly, in whatever way we possibly can, just come into a space of grounding and deep listening. Which it's so wonderful that the bees give us these direct maps for how to do that. All we have to do, like you're saying, is just learn from them. And I just love that you're apprentices of the bees, of the bee mystery school. So amazing. I'm curious with that, if there's anything that you've specifically learned about sacred geometry in being apprentices of the bees, because they feel so connected to that for me.
Yeah. Um, yeah, sacred geometry. So most people know that bees create honeycomb, which is the structure, the infrastructure of the hive, and it houses the eggs, the queen lays, and pollen and nectar. And each cell of honeycomb is lined with propolis, which is a protective substance that also seals the hive as well, and likely does other things that we don't actually know. That feels like part of the mystery to me as well. And they create, most people understand the structure as hexagons, but they don't start out that way. They start out as circles. And then the bees heat up the wax enough to stretch them to be symmetrical in hexagons. And 6 is a sacred number, as is 8 associated with the bees. And they do that to have more space. I mean, they are busy, they are efficient, they're orderly, right? And so the hexagons on a practical level are so they can store more resources for their hive and get as much as they can in that space. The other place the hexagon shows up is when a hive swarms, and I have footage of this from my hives. They swarm every spring. And so when they swarm, they actually swarm out of the hive, and it looks quite chaotic. The queen at some point goes out of the hive. If she doesn't go with them, they end up going back to the hive, which has happened here before. But once she exits, they go up into the sky, very high in the sky, and the bees are actually creating hexagons in the sky. And sometimes they also look like double helixes as well, hexagons, to disguise the queen so that one cannot reach up and grab the queen, because that they would all follow the queen then. It is stunning. When I saw it, I took footage of a hive swarming, and I knew that they did that, but I had never seen it. And when I watched it and saw them weaving hexagons in the sky as they ascended to find a resting place, I thought, I don't know, what magical creatures are we dealing with here? Like, they know how to weave hexagons within the structure of a hive, and they know how to do it outside of the hive in the light. I mean, if that's not magical, I don't really know what is magical, right? I'm thinking of other things. Oh, their orientation flight. The other symbol, and Amy can share more about this, is the lemniscate, the infinity symbol. That is how they orient to their hive. So when we talk about an orientation dance, it is a dance where foragers, worker bees are preparing to forage. They take these orientation flights for several days before they actually leave the hive to forage for resources. And what they do is a group of bees will come out of the hive. They will dance the infinity symbol as a group. They will then land on the hive, and then they jump off the hive as a group and move further away from it, dance some more, the infinity symbol. We think they're working with polarities and the weaving and the not this or that, which is binary thinking, which humans get into all of the time. So it makes it difficult for us to weave things together then, because we think it's an either or. And they do this. And eventually what happens is you can look up into the sky and they're weaving these huge figure eights. And they do this so they know where home is. They know where to come back to once they leave and get resources. So they're orienting to their home hive through movement, through sound, through pheromones, but this orientation dance that they do called the infinity dance. So that is the other sacred numerology piece I will bring in, the 8, right? And the way that they dance it, it is something to witness them. And often one hive will start it and then another hive will do it next to them, and they'll all be orienting to their hives at the same time. And the bee yard is abuzz when they do this. And it's just so, I feel so lucky to be able to witness them be in ceremony, which is what it feels like. So I know Amy has more to add.
I agree, Michelle. I think it is magical and exquisite. It's exquisite to watch, and it feels like being blessed if you witness a swarm, or if you're in a swarm. Like there's something just so incredible about it. That's incomparable to any experience I've had, orally, vibrationally, really beautiful. I think the only things I'll add, I'll talk about the personal lessons I've learned, from the bees about those two pieces of sacred geometry, right? Like the hexagon. When the bees are building their comb, as Michelle said, they want to be efficient, right? They want to. So the great thing about that, what's so incredible about it, is that the hexagon allows them to not have to build double walls. Like one wall becomes, it's for this comb and it's for this comb, right? Like, and it's for this comb. So it's a way to economize space very efficiently. And so there's something to me about, as a lesson to myself, like, don't do more. Sometimes, the do less, don't do more. Do something well. Do it in integrity. Do it in a solid way that serves you and your beloveds and the community. And don't overdo it, right? Like, be smart about it. Be careful, don't overuse resources. Use what you need, not more than you need. So there's like many lessons in that for me. And then the infinity symbol, the lemniscate, the figure 8, is something that Michelle and I, when we went to a mystery school about the bees in the UK, we worked with a lot, and is in the book as a practice, that it's a way to travel and practice between polarities, where you can say, I want to explore the polarities of the light and dark, right? I want to move between those. I want to explore the polarities, the false binary of masculine and feminine. I want to move between those. And just that sort of meditative practice of walking the figure 8 is so profound. And there's ways that you explore, you feel into it, and you can stop on the part where it kind of crosses, right? They call it the knot, the KNOT, but also the knot, the NOT, the place of nothing, the place of void. And so I have learned in the practice of walking the figure 8, I've had some very deep and powerful meditations and experiences of using that sacred symbol in my own learning and journey, and spiritual practice.
I love that. To me, it's just, it feels like such an accessible labyrinth in a way of this pattern, and how this can kind of communicate information that we might not get cognitively, that we just connect directly with this, knowing how amazing that the bees are doing that all the time. It's just incredible. I loved what you two were both sharing, Michelle, what you were sharing about how being in the binary makes it difficult for us to weave things together. Yes. Like, let's shout that from the rooftops. Yes, that is so powerful. It is so powerful. My goodness. Yeah, and then that thing of what you were just saying as well, Amy, about the double wall, the lesson about that, about being efficient, about not needing, there's no need to do more than we need to, kind of a thing of what is it actually to be more in the flow state of our actions, where we're not over giving so that we then burn out and get exhausted. But like the bees are teaching that all the time, of being efficient, being in the flow state, how powerful that is. And I'd love to hear if you're open to sharing a bit more about how each of you began to remember your connection with nature.
I'll share how I began to remember my connection with the bees. I'll share that, because to me it's so profound for me personally. And Michelle often says, and we say in the book, like, that, and other bee tenders say this, that often the bees choose you, right? And so, and I want to say, actually, because I've been meaning to say this, like Michelle and I love this podcast, Sara, because how much you are teaching and welcoming and inviting folks into any path in the nature mystery school, right? So if the bees are your thing, it's an incredible path. If the trees or the mycelium are your thing, it's an incredible path. Like whatever, whatever, whoever your teachers are, and the bees are one teacher. We didn't write this book just for beekeepers, but we felt so profoundly called by the lessons they have to offer that we really were excited about sharing it with other folks. And so for me, the bees started showing up around in my 20s in my dreams. I often dream of snakes. It's been a lifelong thing. And in my 20s, I started dreaming about bees. And I tell the story about how I was in a sort of an emotionally abusive relationship at the time. And in this dream that I had, this boyfriend and I were in a house and we could hear this like loud, kind of ominous buzzing in the walls. And in the dream, we were like, are we in danger? Is something bad going to happen? And then this boyfriend punches a hole in the wall, and behind it is this beautiful, live, thriving, crawling hive, and it's dripping with honey. And that to the day I die, I will not forget that dream. That dream, it was so profound to me in a very obvious lesson. Like the relationship wasn't healthy. Get out of the relationship. You're not in danger by what's outside. What's dangerous is what's happening inside, right? Like all of it was so profound. And so bees kept showing up to me in my dreams, and they do to Michelle as well. And then when I lived in Brazil in my 20s, I had a chance to tend hives and help a neighbor who had 16 hives. And the first time we harvested, and this was an area of Brazil where there was no electricity. So we spent, all day in the heat, harvesting, taking only what we needed, right? But there was lots of honey too. So we were able to take quite a bit. And then all night long in this shed, uncapping and spinning honey by candlelight. And it was such a beautiful and mystical experience, like the smells, the tastes, the liquid waterfalls of liquid gold coming out of the spinner, the notes and hints of all that had gone into the honey. Like it just was a magical experience. And so for me, the bees have been a connecting experience back to nature. And I'm so grateful and have so much gratitude for all that they offer us, their honey, their medicine, their propolis. So I guess that's the story that I'll share, is that they have been for me a deeply connecting way to return to nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. The same for me as far as the bees and the way they help me remember I'm in union or could be with nature. And the way they call us into alignment with the laws of nature, because they have to understand the elements and the seasons and the polarity of expansion and contraction, and something about their geography, to be able to sustain their hive. And they have to understand when a thunderstorm is coming, if they're a forager, to make it back to the hive, or where to hide under a leaf on a tree as to not get destroyed by the rain, right? And they have to understand the cycle of the sun, because they don't forage at night in the darkness. They forage when the light is out, when the sun is out. And they have to prepare for seasonal shifts quite early. So they start preparing for fall. I'm in North Carolina. They'll begin in mid-month, this month actually, July and August, preparing for fall, and then preparing for winter. So there's a way that they, I feel like through their expansive way of understanding the ecosystem and the way to work with it and align with it for their own survival, is something that we also can return to, which is, I'd say, the big lesson that I've learned from them. The other pieces that came to me in response to this question about nature is, I have an oak tree in my backyard that my grandmother Dorothy, my maternal grandmother, never saw in physical form. And this tree feels very connected to Dorothy. Feels like her energy, feels like her spirit. I've had dreams about her in front of the tree. And Dorothy was a gardener, and she loved growing food, and actually had to survive at different points in her life and to support the community. And she loved her flowers. And through this oak tree and lessons I feel like my grandmother Dorothy has transmitted to me through the ether and from the heavens. I feel like that's been a reconnection to nature, like where to plant things in my yard and what plants might be supportive of the pollinators in the yard, like bee balm or catnip. Or hyssop, which is blooming right now, or the echinacea is blooming and the pollinators are all over it, right? How to plant things. And so I feel like, I have a connection to nature that is old, and I actually think we all do. And again, it is a process of remembering. And yet, if I think about the ancestor who has taught me the most about tending land, and not just for myself, but for the collective, and not just for humans, but the more than human world, it's my grandmother. And so I feel like she's a connector in that way, just as the bees are, just as bodies of water are for me, just as the trees are, and deep roots and a connection and feeling rooted and grounded, even when there's mayhem happening around me, just as the air is, and fire, which is an element I work with the most, I would say. All of these things connect me back to something that I have always known. And when you asked the question, I was kind of like, well, yes, we are fractured and disconnected from nature for sure. And yet there's a way I've always felt held by the more than human world. Even in my I want to get out of here because this place doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand. I still know on some level, somewhere in my being, I have always understood I am held by the more than human world. I'm held by spirit. I'm held by ancestors, right? There's actually, we were talking about weaving, a weaving that went into my being here now. And which has everything to do with nature and the way that it weaves and the different players within nature that are working in concert to actually hold us all. So that is, I'm calling in my grandma Dorothy and the oak tree in the backyard.
Michelle, I just have to add, because I know this about you and I love this about you, that I think your intuition is very connected to nature, that you receive signs from nature all the time. Like Michelle always finds hearts in nature and feathers everywhere, and she notices things. Like she's very attuned to if an animal or a bird or a thing, like so I feel like she's very connected, and and nature is speaking to her through her intuition in moments where she's like, oh, of course, right now I found this da 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 feather. It's really cool.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, bestie.
I love that. And so wonderful, your grandmother Dorothy, that it's just so wonderful that you know her, that you have that direct connection with her. And with the oak, through the oak she still lives on, and the power of the dream time, for both of you, the power of the dream time. I'm like, for all of us, the power of the dream time. So powerful to listen to our dreams and what they are communicating. So powerful. I can't even count how many times the dream world has informed for me something about maybe like the dynamic of a relationship that is going on that I wasn't even quite aware of. And then it's like, oh, let's just take a peek under the hood and see what's really happening there. Or even, just this connection of the bee, what was on the other side, the bees, right? It's like, there they were, right there. So, and this thing, Michelle, I think it was you who said this, how the bees help call us into alignment with the laws of nature. That is amazing. I'm like, all of us, that's such a huge invitation for all of us about what is helping, what is calling us to come into alignment with nature. It may be the bees, it may be the plants, mycelial network, like whatever that is, there, it might be the elements. Maybe whoever, if you're listening to this, it might be the elements, like it might be something that is more elemental even, but there is something out there that we can attune to, that we can co-regulate to, that helps us reconnect with an experience of wholeness. Right now it's available. And so I just love that you two are doing and have been doing and are going to continue to do this deep dive with the bees in this way. This is so powerful. Yeah, so powerful. And so I know you have there's this practice of the telling the bees. I was curious if you could explain a little bit about that and what you personally would wish to tell the bees.
It's funny you asked this question, but not, because we're aligned and attuning to one another. I wrote down tell the bees earlier, and I wrote down tell the bees about my mom, which I haven't done since there's been a shift in her health. And telling the bees is an ancient practice that shows up in different lineages, actually. And I'll also say, as we talk about this, that, and you just mentioned this, Sara, maybe it's the bees, maybe it's the mycelial network, maybe it's the trees, whatever, maybe it's elemental. I think you can apply the practice I'm about to describe and we're about to describe to a different being in the more than human world. And telling the bees is a specific practice that began with when someone would die, pass away, transition, then it was said that the people close to that person who transitioned needed to go out and tell the bees about this transition. And there were rituals where sometimes people would turn the beehives to face north, which in many lineages is associated with ancestors, the earth element, and the doorway we will go through when we transition from these bodies. Some rituals included covering the hive with black crepe paper. I've also heard of red crepe paper as well. And so the idea was, if you didn't tell the bees, that something more would happen, right? Something might go awry. And really, as I learned about this practice and as we learned about it, we were, thinking about how the bees, and I do a fair amount of work around grief. So how the bee and grief tending, and how the bees can align with us in this process of grieving that everyone I know is pretty much doing in some way, whether or not they're conscious of it. And so the application was, tell the bees so they can be in collaboration with you as you grieve, as you acknowledge this transition. The practice expanded throughout time, so it wasn't, it became about sort of any transition. We can tell the bees about any transition or struggle we're moving through. It also has been extended to celebrations, right? Telling the bees of celebratory news. And I have told the bees, I'm thinking about over the last year, about so many things. I have sat with them in relationship to the multiple genocides that are happening in the world, in connection to climate chaos as well, and just the dismantling of rights and protections for whole groups of people. I've sat with them when I've lost a hive and sat and shared with another hive of that transition and loss and the conditions in the more than human world that have been created by humans that perhaps led to that, like extreme temperatures, extraordinary temperatures, cold temperatures that the bees here are not used to. I have told them of loss, of physical loss, of losing people who are close to me in my life. And then once I tell them, I just sit and watch and see if there's anything they want to say to me. And one day I was talking to them about the multiple genocides happening on our planet. In particular, I was talking about Gaza, and I knocked on the hive, which is what you can do. And then I sat next to them. This was during the winter time. And what I observed was they continued to do their work. So even as I shared about this, it was warm enough for them to be out a little bit, and they take cleansing flights during the winter time as to keep a clean hive and relieve themselves. So I was watching them and I was like, they're still dancing, they're still working with the light, they're going back into the dark, they're coming back into the light. They hear me. I was clear they heard me. And they're still in ceremony. And there was something so profound in that moment for me of continue to do your work, continue to do your practice, continue to share your medicine, even as your heart is so deeply broken by all of the things spinning that don't make sense to me or my body or my spirit or my soul. And so now what I want to do, and I'll likely do it later today or this weekend, is tell them about my mom and the things that feel overwhelming because there's deep grief about who she was and who she is now. And I want to share that with them, and not to burden them, but to be in relationship with them in that way, because they have the capacity to hold things in a way that I think is sort of like spiritual practice for me, can hold that which I do not believe I can hold. Bees can hold and transmute. Nature can hold and transmute and alchemize and compost, right? In all of these ways we understand, which I think is the benefit of telling the bees, because they are aware of everything that is going on. I don't even have to speak it. They know it, they feel it. So that was a long answer, but that is what I want to tell them. And that's a little about the practice.
Thank you.
I'm so agreement with what you just said, Michelle, that like, I think they do know everything because they are vibrational beings and they pick up on the vibrations of the planet, of us, of what's happening in the micro and the macro. I absolutely believe that they are tuned in and aware on so many levels that are different than our sort of blunted human instruments, right? Which we can build and grow our capacity with. I love this question, Sara. Like, what do you want to tell the bees? And I always, I always just want to say thank you. 1,000 times thank you. 1,000,000 times thank you. Thank you so much for everything you do. I mean, we wouldn't eat without the bees, right? Like, thank you for the food. Thank you for the flowers. Thank you for the teachings. Thank you for the beauty. Thank you for the work. Thank you for the roles. Thank you for the metaphors. Thank you for the sacredness, like all of the things, the honey. I mean, my God, the medicines, and I want to do that. And then I also I want to apologize. I want to say, I'm so sorry for this messy, clunky, self-centered human mess that we have drawn you into, and that we do things. And I even felt this as a bee tender. Like I always said, like I speak rudimentary bee because I don't always understand what they're telling me. I don't understand what they need. And in my inability to translate or understand, I cause harm, even though I don't want to. And there's deep lessons for us in that as humans and what we do with each other across cultures and across identities and across lines of difference, and my way and this way, that just so I want to apologize for the messy, clunky, lack of subtle and intuitive ways that I show up and that we show up. I wish for them that they didn't have to experience that. And I do want to say, because Michelle mentioned this, and we've said it a couple times here, one of the big lessons for me, for us in this book, is that everything the bees make is medicinal. Michelle mentioned medicine, and one of the things that we feel is really important for humanity at this time is, the bees make things that are medicinal for the health of the hive, and they also give it freely. We need to be careful about not overtaking it and not taking it from them. But their propolis is medicinal, their wax is medicinal, their honey is medicinal, their bee bread is medicinal, the pollen they collect is, like, everything is medicinal. And what we are really want human beings to think about is, what is your medicine at this time on the planet? Both what are the medicines you need that help heal you, and they can be many things, but what are the medicines you have to offer? Because so often, I think, because of, dominant culture and messages from all the capitalism and the noise, it's like, well, I'm not good enough, or I don't do that well, or if I only do this, or I'm not like so and so, or if I could just go to school for 20 years, then I could be good enough to do, and it's like, no, we need your medicine now. We need your gifts now. We need whatever it is. And I often say, like, I'm a student of clown. Like, if you're a person who makes people laugh, that's a powerful medicine. It's a beautiful medicine, right? If you are a space holder, a healer, a therapist, a body worker, whatever it is that you do, there's so many ways to bring our gifts to other humans, but also to the more than human world. So we have this like deep call to folks to please share your medicine with the world at this time, and don't like hide it, or think you're not ready, you're not good enough. We need it now.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. And nature is such a powerful mirror in this way about how each being in nature is not ever trying to be a different being in nature ever. It is being of itself fully. And how beautiful is that in the collaborative diversity of the healthy, thriving ecosystem when every being is themselves fully. So much for us to learn around that. There's so much. I mean, there's so much in what you just shared too, of how everything that the bees make is medicinal. To say thank you and apologize to them, so powerful. And Michelle, also what you were sharing about telling the bees about your mom, and just that entire practice of telling the bees, how incredibly powerful that is, and how they have the capacity to hold things. I really, really feel that. And especially for, I mean, honestly, especially for anyone, and especially for folks who maybe grew up without like secure attachment figures, being able to go to the largest secure attachment figure in the world, which is the earth itself, it is nature. It's like that is so powerful to be able to just sink into that. Often I will just go out and lay on the ground as much as possible and just feel held by that wholeness. So solid, so whole, and how powerful that is. And I was definitely crying when you were sharing about that experience, about the grieving, about the grief tending, about how the lesson that you heard and saw in that from them was grieve and continue to do your work, that they are still in ceremony. This message of continue to do your practice and continue to do your dance in the grief. Like do both, all of it, right? Feel the grief, feel it fully, and continue to do your work and continue to practice and continue to dance. So, so powerful. So powerful. So, recognizing, especially because, well, you two both clearly work in many dimensions, and in your work in racial equity and in anything that's coming to mind, I'm really curious, how do the bees support you in your life's work?
Okay, I'll start. So as a white woman who is on a journey to dismantle my own internalized white supremacy and work with other white folks in showing up for racial justice and being, involved in I think a number of things. I mean, I think one of the things that certainly whiteness has taught me is do move and go fast, right? And I do that, and that's for other reasons as well, but that's certainly something I recognize as a racial teaching, right? And that I know best and I can just do my thing and it'll be right, right? Like there's all kinds of unlearning that I need to do. And I think the bees for me show me always to slow down, that I actually don't know what's right or what is being experienced or what's in the field all the time, right? So one thing is, and I talk about this in the book, like every time I move too fast around the hives, I get stung every single time, hands down. And they often sting me somewhere that they need me to have a message. So once I remember having this I had a day where I was like, I had been leading a bunch of affinity spaces and it was just really tense and a lot was going on and there's kind of some tension in my household. And I remember being like, I just want to tell some people like it is. I just want to be able to tell them like it is. And I went into my hive too fast just to top off some sugar water or something that I needed to do that day. And I didn't put my veil on because I thought, I just have to go and do this quick thing. But I did it so fast that it immediately came out and stung me on the mouth. And it was like, maybe you need to tend to your words. Maybe you need to slow down. Maybe not like this in this way. Maybe that's not going to be effective. The energetic way that you're approaching this day, this group, this work, this moment, right? So they've taught me a lot about slowing down. They also, that lesson of attunement. I mean, when I am doing my best work as a facilitator, I am paying attention to the group. And this is something I actually, again, want to brag on Michelle, who's a really phenomenal space holder in this way, who really reads and feels the undertones of groups in ways that I've experienced very rarely in my life. But it's something that I'm constantly learning from the bees, is how to feel the energy of a group and move with what is needed in the moment. Not what my idea was, not what I thought needed to happen, but what is happening now in this moment with this collective. So that's what I'll say.
Thanks, Amy. Um, I am present to what Amy just said about facilitation and space holding, and how often I can feel a group before I mean, I work one-to-one with people and do a lot of group work in many different spaces. So racial equity work and yoga and social justice and healing practices and shamanic work, a lot of different things with groups. And I often I can feel a group before I get there in this way that Amy said. And then when I'm there, I can feel what is underneath the surface. And sometimes what needs to be brought up to the surface. And also I contemplate right timing, which in my relationship with bees, and it relates to what Amy said about how am I moving, when am I moving, what decisions am I making about going into the hive or just standing next to it? Do I need to, is it necessary? Right? This action I'm about to take, all of that comes into space holding and facilitation. Right? Do I need to say this thing in this group? Will it benefit the group, or is it just in service of me? And really, is it in service of me? And to be intentional about what I'm sharing and the timing of that in space and how it might land, right? Intent and impact, which is a lesson from the bees. And the other thing I was thinking about, being able to sense into what's under the surface and needs to bubble up, is the way that we've spoken about bees and their vibration and how we're not bees. And so how we have to observe and listen and attune and watch, that all of those skills come into play when I'm holding space for an individual or a group, particularly if they're communicating in some way that I don't understand, or they're not actually saying the thing they need to say. And they're not getting to the thing that's under the surface. And so I've like watched the bees and the way they communicate and contemplated, what are they saying to me? Right? And then in groups, what needs to be said? Or what needs to have space so we'll be in silence? What is the vibrational tone of this group? Has it shifted? The bees, Amy spoke about, the pitch changes. When they don't have a queen, it changes. When we move too fast, it changes. When there are conditions in the hive that are not healthy, it's disharmonious. The pitch, the tone, the smell even of the hive is. You can tell a lot from that before you even go into it. How many bees are moving in and out. And the other way, there are many, but that I'll mention, the way the bees support my life's work is their roles. Each bee has a role, and they move through these different roles in their life cycle. And all of it is to support the hive. And I would say the through line in all of my work is about healing the hive, healing the collective in some way. Not that I have the power to heal the entire collective, but making space for us to come into our own healing and to contemplate how we will aid the healing of the collective. That is my journey. That touches everything I do. So the bees have taught me a lot about the different roles we can play, and also discernment around what is needed right now and what role do I need to play, and to adapt and shift, because bees can adapt back to a former role that they played, if that's what the hive needs. I find humans pretty rigid in the way that you spoke about, like, I find humans like contracted and rigid a lot of the time, and like, this is the thing that I do. Well, what if that's not what's needed? What if we actually need something else? Can you be curious enough about what that is, given the conditions in place or the context? Can we expand and be malleable in this way that bees are, based on sustaining the hive, not an individual bee? They have taught me a lot about that, which to me feels connected to Dharma as well. That's my dog Jasper, and duty, and being in alignment with my Dharma, which feels connected to what role do I play now. So they support me in I bring them into almost all of my teachings with people. They know they're going to hear about the bees from me because they're such teachers and mirrors, as we've spoken about. And, they are part of the medicine that sustains me as I do my work.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for sharing that. And yeah, so much in that, so much in that. Definitely that aspect around moving with what is needed in the moment, timing, right? Aligned timing. This is so important. This is so important. And discerning not only the role, but just really listening to what the moment is asking for, really listening to it. So great. When I think Amy, you were talking about how the bees they or I can't remember who it was, but talking about the pitch, the tone, the smell, how it shifts. I'm like humans are doing that all the time too. I'm like people our whole society is constructed as if that's not happening. I'm like people are doing that all the time. All the time. So it's so great that the bees can just show us that directly. Um, that aspect of the adaptability. This is so key. I feel like this is so key for the time that we're in right now, is really, first of all, having a mirror that it's possible to be adaptable. And then secondarily, how do we do it? And it's like, well, the bees can show us how. And so then we can look at that and then see that as a model and see, okay, how can I do that in my own human way, kind of a thing. This is so powerful. So, yeah, thank you both so much for joining us today on the podcast. And so I'd love to hear if you could share with us, how can people find out more about you, your life's work, your book, anything else that you feel called to share?
Well, Sara, I want to thank you. You are lovely. And I feel so grateful to be in connection and community with you, and to weave and in this way and the beyond, whatever might come from this. So I wanted to say that to you. Thank you. Thanks for being a space holder, and thanks for sharing your lessons with the world, and thanks for your deep listening in all the ways, and your medicine. So thank you. And people can find me at michellecjohnson.com. My website is a great way to find me. We have many events there that are related to the wisdom of the hive, and then I have a bunch of other things that are also related to it, even if they're not book events. Again, they're all about healing. And I'm also on Instagram at Skill in Action, which is the title of my first book, which came out in 2018. And I update people there. And I have a weekly newsletter that goes out that I love writing. I've heard it's like having a cup of tea with me and reading. It's like learning more about my internal landscape for people. So people can sign up for that through my website if they wish to find me that way. And yeah, I know Amy and I will be offering some other things in the future as well, connected to the bees and teachings from the bees and lessons. So that's how people can find me. Amy, do you want to share?
Yeah, I have not been very forward facing on social media and whatnot, so I'm a little harder to track down what I'm doing. Although certainly anything I do in concert with Michelle can be found on her website. But I will say this because it is in the plans to rework my website one day. And I'm starting a body of work called the Radical Cackle Project, which is about play for adults. So I would just say, as I move forward in the world, just look up Radical Cackle and see what shows up. That's where I'll be.
Well, thank you both so much. Yeah, definitely so wonderful to connect today. And yeah, thank you both so much.
Thank you, Sarah, for your work in the world.
Yeah, thank you, Sara.